Hello everyone, welcome to the third webinar in this Information Security Incident Handling MOOC. I'm hoping you've all enjoyed the first couple of weeks. I haven't started the recording yet, but I just thought I'd say hello to everyone and make sure everyone's had a good week and is looking forward to this webinar. We'll cover off the final stages of hacking techniques, and then we'll start on to countermeasures halfway through this webinar. I might start the recording so that others who missed this webinar have the ability to download it and listen to it as well. So here we go. So welcome to Information Security Incident Handling. This is webinar 3. We're covering hacker techniques and countermeasures. I am going to go through some of the topics we covered last week, just in brief, just to cover them off. And I think hopefully everyone can see the second screen there. All right, so what we went through last week was we went through the hacking process, not just from an attacker's perspective, you know, the bad guy who's trying to get into your network, but also from the good guy's perspective, the one who's trying to test the network, the guy who works for the organization is trying to check that the network is strong and resilient to attack. So not only the hacking process, but the security testing process. We talked about footprinting, understanding what targets you have, then scanning those targets to identify vulnerabilities, and we went through a number of types of network scans and wireless scans, and we covered Nmap for a little bit, and we discovered that it was one of the most capable scanning engines out there, and really a heavily used and very popular and very flexible. And we also talked about scanning applications and you know, the weaknesses in those things. And then we talked about password guessing and cracking. When you get to an application that has a username and password prompt, are there actually methods of guessing passwords through that mechanism? And what happens if you get the hash of the passwords and you start to crack the hashes? How can you reverse those hashes, identify what the password is? And we talked a bit about that. So to start off with, we're going to dive into malware and viruses. I have a couple of polls. Hang on a second. I'm going to start with this poll just to get an understanding of where everyone's at with this technology. Okay, so I've asked everyone to have a go of this poll. Is antivirus still an effective security control? Oh, watching it from here, about 50% have voted, and it is swinging 50% each way, but the yeses have it just at the moment. That's amazing. I'll wait till it's about 75% voted. We have about 59% on the yes, 41 on the no, and we've got about 75%. So I'm going to close that poll now. I'm sharing the results with you now. So basically, it's very split, and I say that's very interesting because the industry is a bit like that antivirus is no longer effective. So why do we still use it? You know, it doesn't pick up those 0 days. It doesn't protect you from malware that comes into the organization. So why do we still so heavily reliant on it? Why is there a multi-billion-dollar industry around antivirus? Why do people spend millions of dollars a year, and enterprises spend millions of dollars a year of having antivirus on every single machine? And I'd basically say that while it looks like antivirus is not as effective as it used to be, it's still highly required. So if you have malware, and we'll go through some various types of malware in the next couple of slides, but if you've got malware in your environment, you need something to be the catcher to actually pick it up after a while. It's the way that basically as malware is created, it ends up in the signature, and eventually will get cleaned up. So it actually limits the window an attacker has in your environment. If they get malware onto your environment and that malware is used elsewhere or is picked up or is used as sampling, then it'll be picked up in the signature or with heuristics, and then finally get cleaned up. So it's a really interesting conversation. Anti-malware is kind of the maligned technology in information security, but to be honest, we rely on it very heavily to ensure that we don't have an environment that is completely riddled with infections. Now, some would say that if that antivirus is actually a symptom of the computer industry not doing things correctly, and you kind of have to see the point there that the antivirus is that safety mechanism that maybe computers shouldn't need to have. Now you look at closed systems like the Apple system, where you don't really have antivirus on iPhones or iPads, and rarely do you have it on Macs as well, where it's fairly close. There have been a few major instances of viruses on Macs, but it's not riddled with it like Windows is. So there is this thought that maybe if we got it right, we wouldn't need antivirus. But to be honest, in the corporate, where there's a major assets at a target, we do need antivirus. So it is still an effective security control, but maybe not as effective as it used to be. So very interesting debate. I'm happy to discuss that, and I'll pick up some questions after we've finished the we've finished this section on malware, and we'll have a look at what the questions are. Okay, so diving into malware. So basically, software is designed for malicious activities. It can be in all sorts of forms, and we'll go through those. Some of the most malicious forms of software in this category actually collects data like credit card numbers, usernames and passwords, and session tokens to actually do bad things. So credit cards, obviously, for selling them or using them, credentials to banking sites or webmail. I don't know if many of you have gone through your Gmail or your Hotmail or your Yahoo Mail recently, but it is incredible how much sensitive information is collected in our personal mail accounts. And for an attacker to get credentials to a Gmail or a Hotmail can actually, or like an MSN mail, what is it, Live Mail now, then they get so much access to confidential information. There's receipts, there's signatures, there's all sorts of things. It's incredible. So yeah, that's what malware is designed to do. It's designed to be surreptitious on a machine. It's designed to often to make money for somebody else in a fraudulent way or criminal way, and it's meant to spread around. And some are meant to cause disruption, and some are meant to stay very much hidden. So viruses, they spread from system to system. They attach itself to files. It requires user interaction a lot of the time. So what I'm trying to do here is categorize some of this malware. Viruses are a particular type. There's also logic bombs in this virus category, where the damage is triggered by an event. We've heard of these at organizations where people have left the organization and the logic bomb has gone off and disrupted some significant assets in the organization. So that's a logic bomb. We've seen some of those in the industry and the news. There's polymorphic viruses actually change to avoid detection as they're moving around the place, so that a signature can't pick them up from one machine to the next machine. I actually don't see too much of this. There is some of it, but usually when you get an executable and you submit it to your AV vendor or to VirusTotal or something like that, then it's usually picked up pretty quickly, and doesn't seem to mutate like that, but certainly something I'm surprised we don't see more of. There are multipartite viruses, which is basically a fancy way of saying that they propagate by many vectors. Configure was a bit like that. It actually spread by the vulnerability MS-0867, but it also propagated by trying to break into weak admin passwords. So I've had a few incidents that I've handled where we thought someone was trying to break into the network, but it actually turned out to be a configure machine guessing administrator passwords, configure infected machine. So that's interesting. So there are some multipartite machines. Also, there's macro viruses. These are old style. I think the I love you virus was part of, it was a macro inside Outlook, and it would execute and run in a macro language. And then there's hoaxes as well, which aren't really viruses, but they're just a nuisance. They're basically fake announcements about viruses. But I've also seen hoaxes where my mother-in-law, my mother is actually quite prone to them. She would send me emails of spider bites and things like that, where there's pictures say, watch out for this spider. If you get bitten by it, you know, almost your hand will fall off, and it shows a bite getting larger and larger in a sequence of photos. And she's very much into her health and wants to make sure we stay safe. So, but those hoaxes generally not true, and they just move around because people feel compelled to send them on to other people and are really just a nuisance. But there are hoaxes about actual computer viruses which really cloud the subject a bit and aren't helpful as well. Now there's worms. Worms are basically, they don't need human interaction. They're just automatic infection spreaders. So I've seen a number of these, and these are the guys that really took down networks about 10 years ago. They would spread around an enterprise environment and would cause the network links to get absolutely saturated. No host program is required. They run on their own, so they see a vulnerability on a network stack, they make use of it, infect that machine, and then try to infect other machines. And we still see these very much around in environments that aren't heavily managed or controlled from a network level. If there's a lot of BYOD and things like that, people bring in old laptops that have had infections for years and years, and we'll bring it into a corporate environment, and all the lights will come up, there's an infected machine and all that sort of stuff. So they are still around, and they're not a lot of fun. They basically go from subnet to subnet. They look at their own subnet first, and they add one, look at the subnet above that, they add one, look at the subnet above that, and they just continually try and infect other machines. And yeah, it's an interesting prospect that they're still around. They can replicate very quickly. I think I had I've got a stat later on about Slammer, but basically they can replicate so quickly like Code Red did. It can actually bring down entire networks and cause support staff to work weekends, which is terrible. They consume resources, and they commonly consume the bandwidth, which is the main issue they have. Examples, the first one was the Morris worm, which took down networks as well. This guy wrote a program that would replicate itself to other Unix machines, and it just flooded everything, and that was the first worm, and people were like, oh, that's not a good thing. And then there's obviously a history of that through NIMDA. Crunchy and Spybot were good ones. They used, I think, MSO3 or MSO4 411 or something like that, MSO 411. And then Configure down that up used the MSO8 67 that I was talking about before. So these worms, they really bounce around, and they're hard to get rid of and stick around on corporates. So I wonder if many people have had experience of that. Spyware and adware, basically this is nuisance. It is, they're not, when they came in vogue, there was a lot of it. People would download stuff and install it, and basically they'd collect information on someone and send it around for whatever purpose, for using for ads, or maybe using financial information for identity theft and things like that. And basically they grab browsing habits, credentials, financial information, personal information, whatever they can, and they send it up somewhere to be used. And usually they're delivered by email attachments or emails that have URLs embedded in them. And this is particularly problematic because, you know, there's a lot of reasons why people click on a URL. There is no this is a major issue for organizations who want to actually communicate with their customers. It is difficult to encapsulate everything you need to say in an email, and sometimes you need to divert people to a URL. Basically, it means you condition your customers to receive emails from you and click on a URL. And a very efficient and effective manner of delivering malware as well. So unless everyone moves away from URLs inside emails, then people will still be conditioned to do it. So it will continue to be an avenue for malware writers and criminals to infect people's machines. So it is a very difficult situation. And this in turn results in drive-by infections. When people click on that URL, they visit a website, their Internet Explorer or their Firefox or their Chrome has a vulnerability in it, and it executes some bit of code and infects the machine, downloads something else, and that's a drive-by infection. They've gone to a website and they've become infected. You've got to be careful where you visit with your web browser. And then people also use peer-to-peer networks to download whatever media they're after, or whatever TV show or some software they're after, and they find that the software is actually infected with some sort of spyware, adware, or some sort of toolbar that keeps on popping up. You know, it's not a lot of fun. I remember the days where you used to open up your browser on your mother-in-law's computer, and there would just be hundreds of pop-ups just all the time trying to sell you things. You're like, whoa, what's going on here? I can't even get to the browser where I'm trying to get a you know, to a website, and that's kind of what it's like. And then there's instant messaging, IRC. When you were on in the old days in ICQ or in I've seen this in Skype as well. Someone will message you randomly and say, hey, check this out, there's a URL. They'll try and get some sort of infection going, and also on USB drives. So this is true of most viruses as well. You throw a USB drive in. There were some automatic install routines in Windows which are kind of getting out of flavor now, which would automatically run malware if it was sitting in the right place when you plugged it into your computer, and that's less of the case now, but still an issue. And it was actually a delivery mechanism of some of the I think the Flame and the malware that was used to infect the Iranian centrifuge, the nuclear centrifuge. I think it was Flame, and the one earlier, I'm having troubles remembering what it is. Anyway, so basically it was the industrial style malware, and it was actually delivered through USB, as I understand it. That's what the reports say anyway. All right, so and then there's adware, shows ads and pop-ups. That's like the pop-ups I was talking about, very painful and not fun to have on your machine. Okay, now Scareware and Trojan horses. Scareware is becoming a major issue for a lot of people. It was kind of niche for a long time where you'd say, oh, I've heard about people kind of infect your machine and telling you, oh, if you don't pay me $300, I'm going to wipe your machine, or things like that. But it's actually gotten really sophisticated. The CryptoLocker software will actually jump onto your machine and encrypt all of your files, and then somehow they'll communicate with you and say, hey, if you want to encrypt, you've got to pay us a certain amount of money. And that is diabolical. There was a situation where FireEye, the organization that makes some pretty sophisticated anti-malware software and appliances, would actually provide the private keys to decrypt your files, but I think it's relatively moved on, different variants now. There's also fake AV, which is pretty. I've had friends who have been taken in by this. I'm sure you all have. It would install on your machine, and then you would have a pop-up saying, if you want to be protected from viruses, you need to give us your credit card number, and we'll charge you $20 a month for having the privilege of being protected. And it wouldn't do anything. It was just a thing saying your antivirus is expiring, pay us some money. And it would actually disable security systems as well and allow them to do something else. And then there's Trojan horses. Looks legitimate. Often it looks like a joke, drink the beer game or play whack-a-mole with a little executable. They were quite popular some time ago. It actually runs a malicious payload. It could actually be a remote access Trojan. The rats, they've been popular in TV shows recently. They might actually destroy data or send it out somewhere else, or help form a denial of service, or be used as a jump host to get somewhere else, or serve files for someone else, or be a proxy. Often they use common ports to allow an attacker to come in. I think there was 1234 was back orifice for a while there when it was an infection, and that was problematic as well. Back orifice would allow an attacker to come in and pretty much take control of the whole machine just through that TCP port. Often they look like games, jokes, screensavers, chat programs, media players, media codecs are very popular for a while. And so you want to play this video, you've got to download this codec and install it, and then you'd be infected as well. All right, now I think this is the last one. Yeah, so the last one on malware. So basically, the final thing is people who put backdoors or trapdoors in software. Sometimes they're included by developers to allow them to perform problem solving without actually having to go through the official ways of going in. This has been known to happen. I think there was a backdoor in Quake for diagnostics. There's backdoor supposedly in Checkpoint software for diagnostics as well. Who knows why they put them in there? Probably because it's easier for developers and good for testing and whatever. You know, when normal processes fail to get access, maybe that's a good way of doing it. But it is a diabolical situation when you're running your enterprise on some of this software. Not that you're running your enterprise on Quake, but you might very well be running your enterprise on some firewall software. Then it's really important to ensure that you don't have those things in the environment, so that attackers can make use of it. Also, backdoors are commonly installed by attackers. The remote access Trojans are a form of that. There are some others, and really they're problematic because they bypass login monitoring a lot, and don't really give you much visibility in what's happening on the machine, because you're not coming through the normal processes, the normal login and using the system. It's a complete backdoor. Types of backdoors are rootkits that hide their processes, applications that actually modify services to add a little bit on, and even just a standard user account on a system so that someone could get onto it after a while and use it. That is something they can do as well. Some sort of the command line remote control tools that are out there. Netcat is the premier one. NC or NCXE for Windows. Basically, you can connect up two machines, get a file going between them, get a command line going between them, and make it very easy to get back into the machine. Make it a listener and sit there silently until you access it. It's yeah, really clever. It's also reverse telnet. I've been doing some work in Metasploit, kind of taking down infected machines. I've done that over a period of time in my career, and often you'll set up a reverse telnet session. So if you exploit a vulnerability on a remote machine, you'll get it to call back to your machine and push a telnet onto your machine so that you can type in commands on your target machine. So that's a good method of getting access and having remote control of something you don't have official control over. And then there's things like PS exec, which is the Windows that are part of the PS tools, the sysinternal tools, owned by Microsoft now, but very capable tools. If you have credentials or you've successfully passed the hash, then maybe you can get authentication to run an executable through PS exec through the RPC interface on a Windows box. So all these backdoors and trapdoors you have to think about. I think if you look into the target incident, you'll notice they use pass the hash to get authentication around the place, and I'm sure they put some backdoors and users on the systems to ensure they can get access and maintain access. And then there's graphical remote control. Obviously VNC is a very easy way to get access to another machine if it's got VNC running. Usually it has a password on it, but there are actually, it's open source VNC, and there are actually some little VNC kind of what I'd say components that can be included in exploits. So Metasploit's got a functionality to inject a VNC server into its exploit so that you can connect to it and take control of the screen. So that's very powerful and can be done very well. Okay, I'm going to look at the questions and see what you've got. Here we go. All right, hold on a second. Okay, so we've got 4 here. I'll just say a belated hello to everyone. I can see you're saying good evening, good morning. It's 6:48 on Thursday. Wow, AM. Good afternoon from Dubai. It's good to see where everyone's coming from. Hello from UK. Great. Hello from Pakistan. That's great. It's wonderful to see everyone from all around the world. That's great. Thank you, Stuxnet. Much appreciated, Matt, Andrew, George, and John. Yes, that's what I was thinking of, Stuxnet and Flame. Thank you. That was killing me. Very disappointing I didn't think of it myself. Not very satisfying. Isn't config still around because it keeps getting patched by the person who created it? Sean, I think that my experience is that config is still around because people have failed to patch even the Windows servers that have been hanging around for so long. I think enterprises become very difficult to maintain when they have so many systems in place. If you get, like in 2001, Windows 2000 Server was an incredible operating system, incredibly successful operating system to put on all your servers with Active Directory, and it was really successful, and everyone was deploying it everywhere, and without the knowledge of all of the vulnerabilities that were within it. Now, when you have such a big fleet like that, it gets really expensive to upgrade it all the time and keep up to date with it. And most organizations keep up with it, but there are pockets of it that don't get fixed up. I've seen things left out of upgrades, like building management systems often get left out of upgrades, video systems, so they're almost like appliances, but they've got vanilla Windows on them. Those sorts of systems that aren't part of the corporate, but are part of kind of facilities and ancillary services are really neglected. So to answer your question, my experience is that config is still around because there are systems that aren't patched, and it's hard to believe, but there are systems that are still running and still usable. All right, now. Yeah. So I'm looking at Ed's comments. Say educate staff to recognize suspicious URLs as a security training or policy. And I've witnessed in my life staff who've done all the training, who should have known better, who are technical, who have fallen for the phishing emails. And it is always surprising when these things come around who actually falls for them, and even with the education and training, there is still a need to have those technical controls. So yes, you must educate, you must tell them how to spot the suspicious emails, but it is a really difficult proposition. And it is good to hover over URLs before you click it, definitely, to find out where they go. But often people who are just using computers for work who aren't technologists, I think a lot of the people in a live session like this are technologists, but those who aren't will find themselves clicking on things and not knowing what a URL means, or not being able to make the judgment call between a safe URL and a dodgy URL. I mean, you know, will they know that that domain name actually shouldn't have an extra E and an L in it. It should just be dhl.com, not dhlel.com. You know, that's the kind of thing that they're having to decipher and not doing very well. And another question here: how effective do you think tools like Cuckoo are in regards to helping protect end users from themselves through gaining intelligence? Sean, I'm not sure what you're talking about with tools like Cuckoo. I've not come across that. If you could explain that in an extra question while I answer another one, that'd be great. But I've not come across that tool. Helping end users from themselves through gaining intelligence. No. So I'll allow you to explain if that's all right. Question from Mark Pietzers. How dangerous is PS exec? We use it internally. Should we consider not using it? Definitely not. It's a very useful tool. PS exec is not a hacking tool in the least bit. You can download it from Microsoft themselves. You need credentials to run it. What I would be more concerned about is having your perimeter protection and having your antivirus right and having IDS and IPS and actual controls to ensure that someone doesn't get credentials to run PS exec. So not at all a dangerous tool, a very powerful tool, definitely. All the PS tools are PS exec, PS list, I think, and there's a PS logged on is also handy, but it's not a reason to not use them, just to ensure that you have the right security controls in place. Oh, okay. Don says, did you mention keyloggers, and what about hidden spam engines and Trojans? I did mention Trojans. Hidden spam engines, definitely. The virus is on there for a number of reasons. These days it's for click fraud, spam engines, siphoning off credentials, generating bitcoins through using GPUs and CPUs, and performing DDoS attacks. So there's all these main reasons why people have a Trojan or turn your computer into a zombie, and there's some very good things written about that. I haven't mentioned keyloggers, but certainly viruses, I mentioned they collect credentials. Either that's through keyloggers or basically man browser, so a plug into the browser to collect credentials as you type them in. So I hope that answers your questions, Don. Cuckoo Sandbox for malware analysis. So similar. So is that in the wire, Sean? It's a very new project. Yeah, I'll have a look at it. But it sounds similar to things like FireEye, NetWitness, and the things that SourceFire and Checkpoint are doing at the moment, where they actually spin up a virtual machine and run the antivirus in that. So yeah, I guess it's the same sort of thing. I will check it out though. So it's good to be notified about those things. So John Walsh is saying one advantage of user awareness training combined with a fast phishing reporting tool such as integrated into Outlook is that you can proactively block malicious URLs following the first employer reporting it, hopefully before someone else gets caught out, effectively combing awareness and combining awareness and technology to work together in partnership. Yeah, but the problem with that, it works a bit like whack-a-mole. There's this balance in phishing emails and corporate emails that you need to allow people to use email so that they can effectively do business and not find that email is ineffective or unreliable. And yet we need to put controls on the email to ensure that we don't get these phishing emails and infections through email. And email still is that main delivery mechanism of tempting people to run in it. So it's yeah, it's a difficult proposition. You've just got to find that balance. Some and it will be down to the tolerance the business has for risk. Some will want to lock it down completely, and some will want to not lock it down and have it available for pretty much anything, and will run that risk. Diego is saying VMs, you create as many SO images as you like, as your SOE has on your company, and then run a suspicious file to get information out. I think you're talking about Kaku. Yeah, that sounds very much like the tools that are around at the moment for doing similar things. And is iCloud safe to use? Well, not if you're a celebrity, Feng Ming, and I won't talk about that because I think it's a very sad situation. But iCloud, I think, is very much safe to use if you use correctly, and I use it myself. Don't anyone try and obtain it. You won't find anything of interest, I promise you. But cloud services used correctly with the right controls and with adequate passwords are very much safe to use. So thank you for the question, Feng Ming. And I'll take the last one and then I'll keep going because they're kind of running through. A bit late reaction on your comment on viruses and closed systems. It is not that Mac OS is more secure than Microsoft. I think even that since Windows 7, Mac OS is less secure. But this is all about market share and business cases. It is far more interesting hacking MS systems as more people are using this. You can use malware coming around for Android as well, again, greatest market share. I do not believe that any system is secure. They're all vulnerable for malware in general. A criminal is just making a business case. That's definitely true, Roland. I agree with you. I think it's a bit of both. Definitely the assets that the criminals are after are on Windows and are on Android. I do believe, however, that iOS stands alone a bit on its own as a more secure environment because of its closed nature. Obviously, if you jailbreak it, then you take kind of your security into your own hands. But there is a vetting process for any kind of software you run on it, and there's not many things as clear and as compelling as the iOS upgrade process. So when you go to a new version of iOS, you get all these new features, and they've made it so compelling for people to upgrade that a lot of people do, and that has made consumer devices stay patched, I think, more so than many others. I think Android's biggest weakness is that it has a poor patching pathway, and it will eventually catch itself out. So what happens is that there are many people in the pathway of patching Android devices, so the manufacturer and the telco, and they're not all compelled to ensure you get that latest patch and to ensure you get that latest feature, whereas the closed system, I believe, is actually much more secure that iOS has. And it has limitations, of course. You don't get as much freedom. You get a closed device, but you also get a more secure device that is less prone to these security things. So when there is a security vulnerability in iOS, it gets fixed up in the next upgrade, and you also get some features in that as well. But they have had a pretty good track record on the iOS devices so far. Let's hope it stays that way. But I take your point. The criminals go where the money is, and it is I think it's a bit of a mix. But I don't want to. There's lots of arguments and discussions about that in my workplace and amongst my colleagues around that. So I won't get onto my soapbox too much. Okay, so we'll move on. That was a bit of a break from the malware, but it's important to talk about. Malware is not going away. There are computers, and computers hold assets, and malware is a way to get those assets. And in the corporate, in the personal life, everyone is touched by malware in some way. So it's really good to understand, from the case of an incident handler, if you see these incidents occurring and malware is part of the incident, then it may be something that's just autonomous and worm-related activity, or maybe it is someone who is persistent and there's actually some human intelligence behind it trying to break into your environment, much like Target or eBay or or Adobe, you know, those environments probably had a lot of controls in them, but people were persistent and attackers were persistent and eventually did get in. So antivirus and viruses and malware and worms and Trojans, all these things are good to know about so that you can identify them as an incident handler. All right, now let's keep going. We're going to run out of time if I keep talking about malware too much. All right, so web application attacks. Now, your web applications are your front door to the organization. They are the first thing people see when they search on Google and click on your website. They see your web server front page. It says, this is my company and this is what I sell. It's very public. It's open to the internet. You can't have a broader audience in the world. It is absolutely exposed. There is no way you can expose anything to any more people than putting it on the internet. It is a huge volume of eyes that can look at your website and scrutinize it and try and break into it. They're obviously all not doing that, but some people are. Now, the types of things they want to do is they want to deface your website, they want to exfiltrate data from your website, and they want to bring your website down for some sort of notoriety or things like that. In the case of defacement, they might use DNS, they might poison DNS to redirect or change your zone file to redirect users to a different server. If you're a very prominent organization and you have a lot of visitors, that would be very compelling for a criminal to do, because then they can infect people who visit your website with malware or try and collect credentials or try and collect card information. So that's really an interesting thing for a malicious person to do. There's also techniques for putting extra data up on a website that people have forgotten sometimes. The put method used to be a classic way of doing that. There's get and post, but there's also put. And put used to allow you to upload files to a website just straight away, and some old websites still allow it, not very common these days. What's interesting is that the put method has actually come back in vogue with the REST methodology. It's actually used again, but in a safe and secure way. So a lot of these old scanners that will scan a website will find the put method and say, hey, we don't want the put method, but actually it's part of the application now. There's also the chance of incorrect privileges. If you allow people who are visiting the site to be able to upload, then that's not a great thing. Man in the middle to grab credentials. So what we're talking about here is somebody in the browser or someone on a router or a link that or on a rerouted DNS. Maybe they're routing your traffic through them. Maybe that's going on, and they can grab credentials on the way through. Brute force attacks will also try to gain admin credentials, and what I'm talking about there is that password guessing. Maybe you left your Apache admin page open or your Tomcat admin page open, and there's credentials on that, and they're just running through the credentials to find the admin password. So there's all these ways they can actually get access to your website and deface it, and it used to be quite popular. Probably still is a little bit popular, but not as much as it has been. Something that's very big in the press is data exfiltration, so actually getting information out of your web server. That can either happen through SQL injection, through cross-site scripting, or through cross-site request forgery. Less through cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery, but certainly they might be able to get unauthorized access to individuals' accounts. There's also authentication bypass as well, which is basically finding a logic flaw in how the authentication works, or by actually getting a valid session token or guessing a valid session token and hijacking someone's session, or sniffing it off the wire like with Firesheep back in there, which allowed people to grab sessions out of wireless networks and pull them down and use that to gain access to websites. And then there's also erroneous application logic, so applications that don't do error checking or don't check for correct input, or allow a race condition of some sort, or allow someone to subvert the controls that are supposed to be in place. And finally, denying service on a website is quite common these days. There are some pretty cool technologies to do it. There's the LOIC, which is basically just blasting a website with data. The low orbit ion cannon, which you can see the picture there of what that looks like. And if enough people get that, Anonymous used this back in the day, a year to a couple of years ago, and they would bring down websites. And basically, they're targeting systems that have low network capability or capacity, and would bring down those links and not allow people to get through them. There's also application vulnerabilities for denial of service. There are some application vulnerabilities where you run a bit of shellcode against a vulnerability, run an exploit against a vulnerability, and it will actually bring the server down. I've seen that quite a number of times with when you're trying to find or get access to a vulnerable machine. You use the slightly wrong exploit, and it'll actually make the machine blue screen or just go offline, which is a bit of a problem. I have a poll here to use for this slide. And I'll get people to have a look. Okay, here we go. If everyone would have a go at voting on that. Basically, I'm asking which of the following is the most serious security issue on a website. Okay, that's interesting. We've got 40% voted. Let's go for 50%. Let's get up to 75%. We've got 71%. We just need a few more. Just a couple more. Just one or two more. I think we'll almost close it. Terrific. Okay, we're going to close the poll. We're up to 77. Thank you, everyone. And I'll share the results. So basically, you can see there's 27% for cross-site scripting, 64% for SQL injection, and 9% for cross-site request forgery. Now, I'll quickly run through these. Cross-site scripting is very much about getting access to running scripts on the client's machine. And if you have a persistence cross-site script, the classic example is being able to post a message to a forum that has some embedded script in it, and when somebody else visits that forum, you actually run script to grab some cookies which can take the session and send it to somewhere else, or divert them to another website. And it's about affecting one browser at a time. Obviously, if you have a bit of script on a much seen website, then it's a little bit more effective. So yes, that is a serious issue. Causes a lot of people pain because it seems to be quite prevalent even in HTTP headers. It seems to pop up quite a bit. SQL injection is more about having that input field where you can put in an SQL command and have that go all the way to the back-end database and execute somehow. There are a few ways that can happen. It can be blind SQL injection, or it can actually give you feedback on the web page. And that is dangerous, and I would agree with the 64% to say that is the most serious security issue in this case, because you can actually drop a table. You've lost your data, you have to restore from backup. You can lose the user table, and maybe you didn't encrypt the passwords, or maybe you don't have strong passwords and the hashes are easily defeatable, and you lose data that way. Or maybe someone's able to get your whole customer database out through your web application, which is an incredible thought, but certainly has happened in the past. And then cross-site request forgery is all about being able to manipulate one website while you're logged into another. So in this world of multi-tabbed browsing, you've got a lot of cookies intermingling, and you can have cross-domain chatter. So if you visit a malicious website, it can ask for a URL that would impact maybe a banking website that you're actually logged into at the same time, and you get this cross-site request forgery. So this site being able to perform a request against another website that you're logged into, which is a bit of an issue as well. A bit less easy to implement, but certainly quite significant. So I would agree with the numbers there around the prominence of these issues as well. So yeah, so thank you everyone for that, and I'm going to hide the results now. All right. Now, web application hacking. So we talked a bit about this before in the previous sessions, but basically Google searching can get you vulnerable services that actually have been indexed by Google. You can get those search operators to narrow down your searches and find indexes where admin is in the title as well, so you know that it's like an admin interface. So what you're doing is you're finding sites that have been exposed on the internet without the owners knowing it, but Google has found them and indexed them, and you've been managed to get them as well. So then you can also look for HTTP access users where someone has left their HTTP user access list accessible on the internet, and that's a bit of a problem as well. Web crawling is good for grabbing the entire site to analyze all the nooks and crannies of it and finding bits and pieces that aren't supposed to be there. wget can also be used for that, and HTTP track also. Web application assessment, the one I'd really like to call out here is OWASP Zap. That is a terrific tool and unbelievably capable for how free it is. I think we covered it last week a little bit, and it's in the it's online in the learn.itmasters.edu.au. So go have a look at that. There's browser plugins like Tamper Data and application vulnerabilities like applications like Slow Loris as well. So those are the things to look at when you're trying to find vulnerabilities in your own environment, and also to understand what attacking looks like. If you see your website being cataloged many times and just being spidered all the time, then maybe someone's having a look and trying to get in there. Now we've covered off these, the cross-site scripting with the poll. Targets are users predominantly, the clients of the application, account, looking for account and session hijacking can grab cookies and even misdirect you or misrepresent the website that you're on to another website. SQL injection can allow raw SQL queries in a field. You can bypass authentication, drop tables, and even get a command shell in the end. And cross-site request forgery launches the requested website with an active session through another website. You may have password requests, funds transfers, and even purchases through that, so quite damaging as well. But I'd say definitely the SQL injection is the main one. And then we have the database attacks, and after this I'll stop for some questions for a little bit. We have database attacks. You can find your databases through an Nmap search and looking for port 1434 for Microsoft SQL and others under different TCP sessions. Microsoft SQL is interesting because it is the focus of Slammer that hit 75,000 servers in the first 10 minutes of it running around, which was just diabolical. And basically that's because of a software vulnerability. There are other vulnerabilities like weak passwords and having no password guessing protection. I might ask what is a good password protection mechanism. So if anyone feels like answering that in the questions, I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, systems that have no password guessing protection are quite vulnerable to brute forcing, and maybe also misconfiguration. You know, they've not configured the database correctly and are allowing too much access where there shouldn't be, or being able to bypass authentication in some way. And then finally, denial of service, being able to thrash that database, making often you'll have a website that has a search facility in it, and when you hit just one query in that search engine, it will go away for a minute and then come back with results. You know then you have something laboring in the background. So if you hit off 300 searches and that's causing this database just to run constantly in the background, you might actually bring down the site as well. So denial of service is also an interesting thing for database attacks as well. All right, so I'm going to have a look at these questions. Okay. I do recommend installing AVs on Android devices, but I'm a bit biased, as you can hear by my previous thing. Daryl says, as part of the security procedures, I've seen SSL proxies put into an organization so all web traffic can be inspected, much like some government organizations have been shown to do also. I have an issue with such man-in-the-middle inspections, even if it's done for good intentions. What is your take on such matters? I also have an issue with it. I think there is a way to do it well as a corporate where there's sort of mutual trust with your staff members. You can set it up so that you have the ability to man in the middle, but you don't man in the middle for, you know, banking sites and free mail and things like that, although free mail might be a little bit contentious because a lot of data heads out through free mail. But you have this whitelist that you don't man in the middle, but then you have a set of you know, SSL connections that you do. But in general, I don't typically recommend implementing it wherever I've been working. There are other controls that you can do to ensure that your staff are not sending too much data out and they're behaving themselves, and rather being overbearing and putting yourself in, you know, and not really showing trust to your staff members. I think there's maybe better ways of doing it. So I hope that answers your question, Daryl. Thanks for that. Diego asks, are WAFs deprecated by current IPSs? I'd say no. WAFs are alive and well. IPSs do perform some of the function, but WAFs are very much a specialized tool and are very much heavily, you know, they're purchased and a technology that's alive and kicking in the industry. And there's some very successful organizations making, you know, a good living from deploying WAFs and delivering WAFs. So yes, WAFs, so I would say no, WAFs are not deprecated by current IPSs, even though there is some overlap. Feng Ming Zhu asks, on high level, how does session hijacking work in the best practice guideline to improve it? Session hijacking basically works by getting a session token out of a transmission, a channel of communication, and making that communication come through the attacker before it goes to each end party, and manipulating the traffic along the way. So that's one way, the man-in-the-middle session hijacking. The website session hijacking is all about getting the session token used by the client to authenticate themselves to the web server. Once you have that token, then you can impersonate that user. When Gmail didn't use SSL, once you had logged in, the session token was actually in the clear. So that plugin that I mentioned before called Firesheep, I think it was a Firefox plugin, would allow you to sniff the traffic and actually pick up Gmail tokens, and you could enter it into Gmail as your cookie, and you'd be able to access that person's email. So the best thing to do to prevent it is really to secure your communications. Make sure you're using SSL, and make sure your DNS is clean, which is sometimes not that easy, but ensure that you're going to the correct DNS, and often that's a job for ISPs to make sure the DNS is secure as well. So I hope that answers your question, Feng Ming, but that's how session hijacking works, and that's how to prevent is to secure your communications. Okay, now can you briefly explain HE access files and how they are hacked? So HE access files are files that give the web server an idea of who's able to access what, and it's a way that the web server itself can decide on who to give access to what. The problem is not so much that they're hacked, but system administrators might make them readable to the world and put them in the publicly accessible area on their web server, their www root or their published area, and then they're just picked up and used. So that's really what it is. It's a basic text file that is readable. So that's a pretty bad thing. Yes, good one, Brad. Incorrect password lockout timeout. That's exactly right. So if you get 4 incorrect passwords, then you get a lockout for 20 minutes, and then you got to try again. That really defeats that password guessing, makes it very long, especially if you have a strong password. Steadily increase the amount of time. Andrew Langford saying a good password guessing protection is to steadily increase the amount of time between password attempts as the number of wrong attempts increases. Yes, that is a good thing to do, and would infuriate some attackers. I can see myself being infuriated by that, doing a pen test or something. That would be painful. So yeah, I like that one. A little bit more complex to implement in the end system. Usually a good 20-30 minutes will do the trick after 3 or 4 attempts. But yeah, I can see how that would work. And then Mustafa saying maximum sensible timeout should stop brute force guessing. Yeah, thanks for that, Mustafa. Very nice. Okay. All right, I'm going to head back to the live session. There are a few more questions, but we're going to run out of time if I don't draw this in. And I'll run through some of these, the rest of these slides. Okay, so PBX hacking, basically you can dial up connections to PBX and get access to them, maybe over the internet as well. Some people are doing that, putting their PBX systems on the internet, or maybe you have someone's been infected on your network and someone's got a foothold on your network and they're looking for the PBX. And why would they do that? They'd be looking for your PBX because it has the ability to make lots of calls, and they can farm those calls out or sell that calling ability out to calling cards and things like that. So you've got to make sure your PBX is secure, and if you have an intrusion around your PBX, look for these sorts of weaknesses with your PBX or PABX. Voicemail hacking, default PIN numbers are a problem. We've seen this in the press in Australia lately, but more so in the UK over the last 3 years, it may even be longer now, where people were provided with, or celebrities even, were provided with voicemail systems that had default passwords on them, and all that the reporters had to do was to find out the celebrities or the prominent person's mobile number, and they could access their voicemail. All sorts of information on that. You just need the mobile number. So that's a big issue on phone systems. Directly inward system access. These were systems to allow staff to make lower cost company calls. So to use the company calling systems, it's basically allowed to piggyback them off, make a local call and then make a long distance call through the company system and provide an easier way to do it. If you've got access to the DISA, then you can resell those long-distance telephone calls and make use of it, much like hacking in PABX, but it's a service for a similar system. Then we're talking about remote access attacks. Obviously, remote access is all about getting into your corporate network through whatever means. IPsec, so a VPN can be a way of doing that, going from site to site. If you've got access to one site and there's a VPN tunnel to another site, maybe that's a good way to get in there. I think if you had a HVAC vendor who was connecting you to your site with a site-to-site VPN, such as there was in Target, you would want to have a look at that to make sure that they only have access to the things they need access to, and they're doing some sensible authentication as well. There's also client-to-site, where one person has a computer, they load a VPN client on their machine and they connect to a site, and all of a sudden they look like they're on the network. They get a local IP address. It's as if, for all intents and purposes, as if they are actually local on the enterprise network. The important thing to look out for here is split tunneling. You don't want someone to have a leg in your corporate network and also a leg in the internet. So you don't want that's the kind of split routing to occur. So if you do allow people to VPN in, then it should be encapsulated to the enterprise environment, so they're not allowing that foot in each bucket. All right, so then we have Google hacking again. So remote access can allow you to, you need some sort of configuration to get remote access. There are Cisco VPN profiles that are PCFs Cisco VPNs are very popular in the marketplace, and if you get a PCF file, it gives you a good indication of how to get into a company's website. They hang over UDP 500 for IPsec, and there's also Citrix. So a lot of organizations now present Citrix gateways to the internet to allow remote access to applications. If you just have a single username and password authentication, you may be susceptible to password guessing, but you'd hope you'd have lockout and things like that. And you also, if you're allowing non-trusted users to access Citrix and have temporary access and control, you don't want them to be able to break out of the Citrix session into the operating system of the Citrix server and beyond, and it's very similar to like a kiosk-style breakout. I've seen this in various organizations where they have kiosks, and if you press Control-P and then right-hand click and say explore, then you'll end up in the operating system as the system user. So you've got to look out for those things, typical things that help hyperlinks Internet Explorer. The kiosk breakout is a good way to gain access through somewhere that seems quite innocuous. So once you get in to you know, the hacking mentality is you've got to get in, you kind of move around the organization, but you want to stay in the organization as long as possible. You want to evade detection. You want to erase that evidence of you being there in the first place, and you want to get logs and error messages, files, and usernames. So you want to start collecting things so that you can make more use of it, and it's more valuable. Rootkits are a good way of remaining hidden. They hide malicious functions in those system files that you wouldn't expect, and are hard to find. They typically work at the kernel mode with root privileges under the radar, and really they're designed to maintain that continuous access and monitor traffic and allow further software installation if needed. User mode rootkits sit alongside other applications, can sometimes use DLL injection, DLL and process injection to hide themselves. It doesn't look like the process has changed, but in memory there's this other application running inside them. So very insidious, very difficult to pick up sometimes. I've mentioned Metasploit a couple of times this time, but Metasploit's actually got a interpreter that can run inside some other application spaces and be a very fully fledged attack mechanism on an organization. So yeah, some really clever things that people have done there. And then there's this thing about alternate data streams. This really is just a quirk of NTFS, where you can inject data into a file that can be retrieved by a special command. It's commonly used for metadata. It's difficult to identify. You can find files with that are larger than they should be, but basically it's a place for attackers to hide information. And quite interesting. I might post something about alternate data streams on the forums. All right, so we're going to jump into countermeasures now. Thank you for sticking through the hacking. I think I have a poll. Yeah, for something coming up. That's okay. Not just yet. Okay, so we've got the last kind of 15 minutes. I will dive into the countermeasures. We'll see how far we get, and we'll go from there. So basically, we've talked about how to hack into things, and we've talked about how to test things from the perspective of the incident handler. And the incident handler really needs to know about this stuff because they are the ones who will observe the effects of hacking. So the best way to really understand what those effects will be is to actually run them yourself. So you need to know what the logs look like when someone does a brute force. You need to know what the antivirus looks like when there is an outbreak. You need to know what the Windows processes are when there is an infection or when there's no infection. So you've got to understand what normality looks like and what an attack looks like. So the best way to do that is to try it yourself and to actually do some lab work and to get to know what these attacks are. And doing it yourself can be quite rewarding, can be quite frustrating as well, because sometimes these applications, these hacking applications, don't work as well as expected. But when we know what these attacks look like, we then want to know how to fix them up. When we have an incident, at the end of it, what our managers are going to say and what the executive is going to say is, how do we stop this in the future? What was our weakness? How did we miss this? And then we talk about countermeasures and a security program and things to stop these things happening. Now the main function, the main categories that I break this down to are network level countermeasures, system-based countermeasures, and then security architecture, which is broken down into zoning and security services. And this is the enterprise approach to actually implementing countermeasures within an organization. So network analysis tools. We're really talking about intrusion detection and prevention tools, IDP, IDS, IPS. They're very kind of common now. Signatures identify malicious activity. They alert somebody does something about it. They are sometimes put into protective mode where they'll actually block data. It can be dangerous and quite problematic, but it is good to do. It's excellent for post-incident analysis. So when you are collecting data that way, then you can go back and say, actually, what happened when this occurred? You might like to actually do a brute force password guess across the network through your IPS to see how it actually reacts. Do you get red lights flashing? Do you get alarms and alerts? Is there something that the IDS does that will tell you about it? It's good to test it out with some definitely the basic attacks. So I've got this poll that I want everyone to have a go at. You should be able to see it now. Basically, I'm asking which system provides local protection from network threats. I think that's what it says. And I'd like you to okay, we're at about 35%. I need a few more. You guys who are looking at a window other than this window, jump back and have a vote. I've got about 64%. Very interesting. Just need a little bit more. Just wanted some good participation in the polls. And I'll stop at about there. Okay, and I'll share the results. So you can see there that most of you got it right. So the intention is just to draw out what these NIDS, HIDS, NIPS, and HIPS are, or IDP, Intrusion Detection and Prevention. NIDS is basically Network Intrusion Detection Systems. HIDS is Host Intrusion Detection System. NIPS is Network Intrusion Protection System, so it's gone from detection to protection, and then again Host Intrusion Protection System. So it's just a combination of different things. The ones that sit on the network and watch for things are the network style. Obviously, they act as the gateway, as the monitor on the network, and the Host Intrusion Detection Systems or protection systems actually sit on the host themselves. And look at the environment. So the host intrusion prevention system will actually also look at local network protection as well. So we'll look at the data coming through. So HIPS is right. Network intrusion protection systems generally sit off in the network, in choke points of the network, to gather as much data as they can, whereas the local detection happens by a host intrusion prevention system. And they can be problematic. They can require a lot of food and water, maintenance, and work. Yeah, so this really works at the network level. Looks at the protocols like a packet sniffer, and it sends an alert or terminates activity if it finds things that are wrong. Can integrate with firewalls or be a module on firewalls. It can't inspect encrypted traffic unless you're doing that man in the middle and de-encrypting. There are ways to do that, but if it's encrypted, obviously breaking that encryption, if it is strong encryption, is too difficult. And it can also collect information very useful for investigations. That system analysis, file integrity monitoring, keeps an eye on critical files and settings. Good for change control as well if you're trying to make sure the system isn't modified, and good for post-incident analysis once again. And also you can use it for password auditing, so you can find weak accounts on systems and find things that are weak. Password auditing tools also are John the Ripper, Cain and Abel. They're very good for running through either password guessing, also the Hacker's Choice Hydra, which I discussed last week. Basically, they're good for running through, not only getting into systems, but also making sure that you are protected in testing systems. And then exploit tools also provide that ability to test a vulnerability, much like Metasploit. All right, now part of our protection mechanism is logging and monitoring. We want to keep an eye on critical files and settings. Good for change control as well. Good for incident analysis as well. This all just gives us information. SIEM, logging and monitoring, gives us visibility. If you're in an environment and you know there's systems around the place, but you have no visibility, you don't know what's going on. So SIEM is a good way to collect all that together and to have an idea about who is trying to attack your environment. It's there really for two things, basically to identify an incident and notify you, or to do a post-incident investigation, which is an important thing as well. Events of interest, you want security events, of course. You want log in, log off, add, disable, remove people included in group. System events like shutdown, restarting of services, alteration of time, deleting of critical files, privileged functions being used, application DB, similar log on, log off, security equipment with suspicious behavior, blocked events. Those are events of interest. The systems you want to have a look at, major business applications, your servers and workstations, your AD, file shares, print servers, they're all of interest to the attacker. Authentication systems, log on, log off, network devices and services like VPN routers, switches and DNS servers, and security equipment, of course, IDS, IPS, firewalls, antivirus. All these things are good to get feeds for your log and monitoring system, so that you can write rules to ensure that you are collecting this information and making sure you know about it. And it looks like a lot of information that you want to be grabbing, but you just need to start somewhere and slowly collect those logs and slowly get them centralized, and then search on them and alert on them. And it is a very powerful tool if used correctly, and very much good for visibility. So highly recommended in your arsenal. There's also antivirus, but also going one step further is malware analysis. When there is an incident where you have malware going on, you want to be able to identify the purpose of the malware. This often just means sending it up to VirusTotal or sending it to your AV vendor and getting the name of the virus and then researching what that virus does, so you can identify the purpose of the virus, but also you can do further things than that, like run it up in a VM. It's very useful when malware is custom written. You don't have that signature for it, but basically when you have a infection, there's some few things you need to do. You need to make sure you have updated signatures. You need to run a full scan. If you have an executable, you want to get to VirusTotal, and if you're still not sure, you want to get a second opinion. Run it up on one of these live CDs that has an AV scanner in to make sure the system is clean with the latest definitions. Very important there. Those live CDs, I'll send a URL for that on the forum. Everyone should know how to get to a live CD so that they can clear their machine of infected if needed. Sorry, hang on a second. Excuse me. Okay, and then there's advanced steps like running it up in a VM, like I said before. There's benefits of that. You can actually run it and keep track of what it's doing with some of the PS tools. Do that as well. See what network access it opens and what processes it runs, and also maybe even running a debugging tool to look at the code, but that's starting to get pretty tricky and into the realm of malware reverse engineers. Okay, and then there's information security architecture. So from an enterprise perspective, you really want to be able to build your security architecture to ensure that it is reused and built upon. So you want to protect assets at a macro level. So if you look at your organization from a high level, you say, all right, well, if I had to pick 5 large-scale assets, what are my assets? Am I a retail organization where my assets are my POS terminals and maybe my back office systems? I mean, is that 2 major assets that I have to think about? So that's good to start off with, and then you build the technical frameworks that protect those major assets at that level so that you can reuse them as needed. Then you must ensure that you actually align your controls to the business appetite for risk. Maybe they don't want their systems to be Fort Knox. Maybe they don't want to authenticate 5 times to get into their email and have 5 factor authentication. So you've got to align it with the business and get that signed off for application. And then also centralizing those security services, controls and reporting means that you're reusing that stuff, reusing investment, but also reducing work by making sure you're only watching one screen, you're only getting one set of reports, and you consolidate it. It takes a lot of work, but is very valuable when it's done correctly. And then there's those controls that you place in your information security architecture. There's 3 general classes of controls: the protection, detection, and response. Protection obviously comes and is preventative. Detection, lets you know when the preventative hasn't worked or there's a gap and something has happened. And response is your incident responses like what we're talking about, or maybe even a control that will resolve things or fix things up. Those components at the network level is like we talked about: firewalls, zoning. You want to have DMZs, business systems. You want to use NAT as you can. Or IPv6 is making this a bit difficult, and use network as well. So zoning is all about making sure you have the right bubbles in your network that correlate to exposure and asset level, right, and confidentiality level and value, right? So at one side you're looking at, how is my network exposed? Is it exposed to the internet here? Do I need to segment that off? Is it exposed to third parties here? Do I need to segment that off? Is it exposed to just corporate here? Do I need to segment that off? So looking at those big areas. And then you think, well now I have data as well that is accessible. Now I need to encapsulate the data of similar here so I can reuse those controls, and I need to put the data of similar nature here so I can reuse those controls and these people can access it, and different authentication mechanisms between them. So zoning is all about having that balance between the value of the asset and the exposure of the asset, and finding the right segments to put places. And I think the targets of the world who seem to have had fairly flat networks could have done with some zoning for that matter. We've talked about IDS, IPS, and WAF, deep packet inspection and protocol analysis, and application protocol analysis. Denial of service protection is often all about filtering out masses of traffic, and sometimes has to happen upstream, like cloud service DDoS protection. That's a whole discipline in itself. But you basically want to protect your key services. Maybe they're corporate services, maybe it's websites, maybe it's network services itself. Data loss prevention is part of the network level security architecture, even though it can be on the endpoint as well. But basically it's looking for sensitive data going out of the network and performing that function of protecting the data in that way and alerting the right people. That requires the organization to really identify where confidential data is. And also remote access control, making sure that only those people who are supposed to get in do get in. Then change management to ensure that security review is done at the right time of change. So you can see all these areas of security architecture at the network level. You've got to have these building blocks to ensure that across the organization you're doing the right things to secure. At the system level, you have anti-malware, patching, of course, patching at build time and then regularly afterwards, and then emergency path for patching fast. And this concept of a patching pathway, sometimes people put systems in and they're isolated from firewalls and proxies and any kind of network, but they can't patch themselves, so they end up being vulnerable. Access control, what you've got to think about for patching is the longer some system stays static in place where it is, the more vulnerable it becomes. So it's just the nature of it. They just naturally degrade. I know that's a bit manufactured or a bit contrived because they're vulnerable at the start, but we just don't know where they're vulnerable. As those vulnerabilities get discovered, they are basically degrading in security. Okay, and then access control, basically central authentication, the TACACs you're using, the radius or the Active Directory that you're using to authenticate everyone. Then centralized logging and monitoring. The write once, read many systems are good for dumping logs to that can never be changed afterwards. And then syslogs, also hashing those to make sure that they're not tampered with. File integrity monitoring, these are all good controls to ensure that you have this in your architecture, all these components. Certainly I wouldn't use file integrity monitoring across the board, but in certain events where security is paramount. And then finally, hardening, making sure those unneeded services are turned off, software is removed that is not needed, and default accounts are turned off as well. We talked about HIPs with heuristic attack profiling, port scan detection as well. So those are the major components of security architecture at a network level and system level. I know that's kind of dry, but these components are what you might be missing and need to draw upon when you have an incident and need to recommend some sort of control. If there is a gap in your environment, then maybe you need to expand one of these controls. So that's why we need to cover that in the live session. So it's gone 10 o'clock. I'm going to stop there. Thank you everyone for participating. I might just answer these last questions just quickly. Hopefully there's not too many. Okay, I've got 3 there, so I'll just quickly answer those. Ed says, how about company access capable smartphone devices? Could you hack that to gain email access or notes on passwords on the phone? Yeah, certainly smartphone devices have a lot of information on them. There are some good systems to ensure that is secure. A lot of the MDM, the mobile device management systems, are quite sophisticated. I would say that it is a risk, but sometimes an overstated risk, but still a risk definitely to be concerned about. Why would split tunneling be bad for enterprise? Please elaborate. Split tunneling basically means you can have a machine that has an IP address on the enterprise network and an IP address on the internet, and if you are vulnerable to some sort of worm, so say you have, it was back in the day of Configure, you got infected by Configure, it looks as your local IP address and starts infecting inside. So that's why the split tunneling is not a good thing to have. Monaha, thanks for that. And Daryl, any known vulnerabilities with MS remote access, such as a remote application server? There was a very prominent one with RDP, probably about 18 months back, that does need to be patched if you haven't done so far. It was a remote code execution. I don't know if there's too many in the wild exploits of it, but certainly it needs to be patched. WAF, Andrew, I just saw that. WAF is Web Application Firewall, and it is basically a very sophisticated proxy that looks at the HTTP protocol itself that the client is communicating to the server, and looks for malicious payloads and will block them if necessary. That's what WAF is, Web Application Firewall, specifically for web applications. Okay, so that's the end of the webinar. I will just quickly get the get the discussion questions up, so they should be up there now. I will stop the recording, and that will be the end of the live session. I thank you all for sticking through it. I know it can get kind of dry talking about countermeasures. It's much better to talk about hacking. But yeah, I thank you all for bearing with it. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jens. Thanks, Lewis. Thanks, Andrew. Much appreciated.